We shall create a South Africa in which the doors of learning and of culture shall be open to all. We shall have a South Africa in which the young of our country shall have access to the best that mankind has produced, in which they shall be taught to love their people of all races, to defend the equality of the peoples, to honor creative labor, to uphold the oneness of mankind, and to hate untruth.
This speech focused on the creation of the so-called independent Bantustans in South Africa just months after the Soweto uprisings. It would be a seminal moment in efforts to shift the international landscape against the apartheid regime.
We state now, as we stated then, that an incontrovertible part of the demands of our people is that there shall be one united and democratic South Africa. We shall never abandon our birthright to the ownership and control of the whole territory of our country, nor countenance any attempt to balkanize it and to set its peoples one against another in tribal, racial, or national conflicts.
It was in 1976 that Oliver Reginald Tambo would address the UN General Assembly for the first time as a leader of the liberation movement, the African National Congress, and not as an official representative of the then South African government that was at the time a fully fledged UN member state. It was also the first time that a leader or representative of the majority of the people in South Africa would address this General Assembly almost 2 decades before the African National Congress would take control of the Union buildings in Pretoria.
South Africa's current ambassador to the UN first met Tambo in 1976 in Luanda, Angola, where he'd arrived for orientation and training in the ANC's Umkhonto we Sizwe.
Most of people who work with OR, you know that here is a leader who listens, who guides, who try to, to develop people. But the only problem with OR that was, we call it this way, it was too much of a brilliant person, you have to know your story. Very unassuming, but a very deep intellect. And he always did his homework.
Machila explains that he met OR several more times in different countries right through the 1980s, eventually being assigned by Tambo to open an ANC office in Tokyo, Japan in 1988.
He was given a very clear mandate by the ANC under Chief Albert Luthuli. He was a vice president of the ANC, and he was asked, we can see what is happening at home. The extent of the repression of the regime, arrests, killings. Can you go out and mobilize support? Can you go out and mobilize material, political support for the ANC? Can you go out and open up opportunities for us to be able to conduct the struggles? Because the party was banned, the political parties was banned. So I had a heavy mandate to fulfill. But I think it was a right choice.
The country's former deputy president met Tambo once in 1986 when he addressed the World Council of Churches in Geneva.
He was one of our biggest bridge builder with the international community. And he has a very rich history with the United Nations that starts in 1960 when he came to the United Nations, welcomed by the African ambassadors and then the non-allied group, which then led to the formation of the Special Committee Against Apartheid. And from there onwards, the bond between him, the ANC, and the United Nations grew stronger and stronger. And it helped to profile our struggle.
A profile that grew deeper through the establishment of the UN Special Committee Against Apartheid, whose principal secretary was Enuga Reddy for over 2 decades, seen here in a 2014 interview.
That in 1949 I got a job in the United Nations.
At 93, he reads some of his reminiscences of Tambo at the UN.
Oliver had great regard for the United Nations. He never indulged in radical rhetoric and idle exaggerations about the progress of the struggle. He used to brief me about the assessment and thinking of the ANC. He always treated me, as he did all the activists against apartheid, as a partner in the struggle rather than a mere friend or supporter.
With Tambo's input, in 1960 the Security Council took up the question of apartheid for the first time. In 1962 the General Assembly passed a resolution deeming South Africa's racist policies in violation of the UN Charter. In 1963 the Security Council urged all states to cease arms sales and shipments to the country. And due to years of lobbying by the Committee Against Apartheid, South Africa had its credentials revoked from all work of the General Assembly in 1974.
Being resolute, because there was also a time when there was a view that some of the powers were much more concerned about protecting the whites in South Africa than they were concerned about the liberation of the black people. And in his writings and speeches, he makes that point very clear, that I do not want the United Nations to be telling us how we must be protecting the whites, who we do not want to in any way abuse, but we want the United Nations to help us to liberate the black people of South Africa and everybody in South Africa. And I thought that was a very important distinction.
A reference to a 1963 Nordic initiative at the UN that, while placing pressure on the South African government, also wanted to reassure the white population in the country.
He told me, even if we have a prolonged struggle, we'll need to go to a tent sometime and negotiate an armistice. We will make concessions to the enemy during those negotiations because he has the power, but we cannot now make concessions to other governments.
The oppressed people of South Africa.
Tambo's words in 1976 demonstrated a clear vision of a South Africa of the future.
Many whites in South Africa are ill at ease because they are aware of the immorality of the injustices and cruelties that are being practiced in their name and on their behalf to uphold an inhuman social order of which they are the beneficiaries. They already sense that change is coming soon. We realize that all but a small handful of true revolutionaries and men of conscience among them will continue to support the minority regime because of training, because of self-interest, because of fear, and because of inertia. Yet they, the whites, also need to be liberated from the obscurantism, backwardness, and ostracism into which they have thrust themselves. Our national democratic revolution, therefore, has the task also to liberate even these, our oppressors.
He carefully developed this argument to say this union is in contrast to the Charter of United Nations. Above all, Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So it can be a body, it can be a state that is allowed to represent the aspiration of South African people. I mean, to me, that was a masterstroke.
After decades waging the struggle outside of her borders, he would return to South Africa in 1990, only to suffer a stroke a few years later, succumbing to complications a year before the country's first democratic election in 1994. He was just 75.
It just was a pity that himself, Walter Sisulu, Mandela, Omgov did not get the time to sit together and say, well done, we got thus far. But at the same time, these years in exile and everything that he went through, the strain of holding a movement together must have taken its toll. But I still think that we were robbed of somebody that the country could still have used.
Ambassador Machila believes the pressures of his work in exile, the years spent crisscrossing the globe, holding the ANC together in those difficult times, took its toll.
I think for us who were lucky enough to see a dawn of a new South Africa, I think she will feel responsible. First, I think we were lucky to have been gifted such giants, such leaders, such strategists, such thinkers to guide us. And then we arrived at the promised land, a new South Africa. And I think we should take care of this promised land. And I think we should do everything possible, even if we disagree, even if we may sometimes not totally within the party, within the broad political party, opposition ruling party, trade union, churches, youth, women. I think all of us should take one oath and one decision. We'll preserve the motherland, we'll preserve this beautiful country for which so many people have sacrificed for, including Oliver Tambo.
A gift to a grateful nation, and a beacon that continues to shine as an example to those left to complete the task. Sherwin Bry-Pease, SABC News, New York.